Seth Rogen's show dramatizes the relentless power games and the performative nature of recognition in Hollywood, drawing heavily on the tradition of three classic satires: Network, Birdman, and The Player. The show follows Matt Remick, a newly minted studio head who must navigate a world where artistic ambition clashes with corporate expediency, and where reputations are currency to be guarded fiercely. It dramatizes the relentless hunger for prestige and recognition behind the scenes of Hollywood. The first episode captures this perfectly. Matt agrees to make a silly blockbuster about Kool-Aid to please the CEO, even though he wants to back a serious film by serious filmmakers. He then buys Martin Scorsese's personal Jonestown script, not to make it, but ultimately to bury it and use it as a bargaining chip. Now, when he tells Scorsese the truth, the director breaks down in tears, illustrating the tension between creative ambition and corporate politics in the pursuit of recognition. The moment encapsulates the show's core theme. In Hollywood, behind-the-scenes players crave acknowledgement as much as stars do, if not more. To understand the studio's deeper roots with regards to this, it's essential to consider the three films that it draws from. Birdman, released in 2014. The Player, released in 1992. And Network, released in 1976. Each film reveals facets of prestige, ego, and the struggle for recognition in media industries, shaping both the studio's narrative and technical style. While these theoretical underpinnings likely weren't front of mind for creator Seth Rogen, whose goal ultimately was to satirize rather than theorize, his past canon and instincts reveal a deeper cultural critique embedded in the comedy. 1. Birdman. Alejandro González Iñárritu's Birdman centers on Regan Thompson, a washed-up actor struggling to reclaim his artistic prestige beyond his blockbuster past. Regan's battle is deeply personal. He seeks recognition that transcends commercial success and fleeting fame. His identity is constantly performed and fractured under pressure, a reflection of the industry's unforgiving demands. The studio channels this psychological tension by showing how characters constantly perform their identities, both in private and in public spheres. Seth Rogen's character's insistence on being thanked in the Golden Globe episode echoes Regan's need to be seen not just as a star, but as a meaningful creative force in the industry. Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor's theory of the authentic self in a fragmented world helps clarify this dynamic. He argues that a person's identity isn't formed in isolation. It relies on recognition from others to take shape. In Birdman, the studio both push this idea to the extreme, showing what happens when the self is torn between inner conviction and the constant need for external validation, especially in a world where performance never truly stops, on or off the stage. Technically, the studio employs Birdman's signature style of wide lenses, chaotic continuous takes, creating an immersive experience that mirrors the nonstop pressure of performance in Hollywood and Broadway. The chaotic camera work traps characters in tight spaces where the performance never ends, recalling the claustrophobic atmosphere of the theater in Birdman. Additionally, the use of Antonio Sanchez's jazz percussion score in the studio echoes Birdman's musical undercurrent, amplifying emotional intensity and chaos. The frenetic pacing and existential dread found in Birdman serves as a stylistic forebear of the show's aesthetic, revealing that the studio is consciously in conversation with other satires about fame and prestige. 2. The Player. Robert Altman's The Player explores the corporate side of Hollywood, focusing on Griffin Mill, a studio executive who inadvertently kills a screenwriter he thinks is stalking and sending him threatening letters. Griffin both literally and metaphorically ruins the very things he loves. Creative voices that threaten his reputation, position, and social capital within the studio system.
You know, I love movies, but now I have this fear that my job is to ruin them.
In this contradiction, the film reveals how reputation and prestige serve as forms of social capital for executives, frequently taking precedence over artistic vision or sincere intentions. In the studio, the portrayal of executives scrambling to protect their own reputations mirrors Griffin's navigation of Hollywood's ruthless prestige games. The studio's exaggeration of Hollywood's obsession with prestige by turning representation into an unsolvable equation is an example. In the Kool-Aid movie subplot, every casting decision triggers a new dilemma. Ice Cube is cast as the Kool-Aid Man, but his presence is flagged as potentially stereotypical. Sandra Oh is dropped to avoid having a non-black spouse opposite him, replaced by Regina King, until someone points out the optics of having only black voice characters with the live-action cast remaining white. Each move is meant to correct the last, revealing a panic logic where the presence of more than one actor of a certain race, gender, or sexual orientation must be balanced by something or someone else, lest it seem too skewed in one direction and damage the social capital of representation. Inclusion becomes less about meaning and more about math. The process, driven by fear of criticism rather than belief in representation, collapses under its own contradictions, culminating in a PR disaster. French theorist Pierre Bourdieu has a concept of symbolic capital, which clarifies what's at stake here. In Hollywood, identity itself becomes a currency, carefully managed to signal moral legitimacy and cultural fluency. And as a studio and the player show, this kind of prestige is fragile, easily lost, endlessly recalculated, and ultimately undone by its own contradictions. The studio draws from Robert Altman's ensemble-driven characterization, nodding to the player by naming Bryan Cranston's character after Griffin Mill. The show also adopts that film's sweeping crane shots to evoke the slow, relentless churn of the entertainment industry. These techniques heighten the satire, portraying Hollywood as a self-cannibalizing ecosystem. 3. Network. Sidney Lumet's Network dramatizes the hunger for visibility through the story of Howard Beale, a news anchor whose televised breakdown becomes a national spectacle only after his firing. Beale's demand to be heard mirrors the universal human desire for recognition. However, his newfound fame comes not from genuine power, but as a commodified product of the media machine, a system that turns personal breakdown into entertainment. The studio reflects this paradox through its depiction of how outrage and spectacle are leveraged to generate buzz and prestige. Seth Rogen's character struggles to keep his creative passion alive. Amid corporate pressure, recalls Beale's fight to be authentic and recognized on his own terms. Both narratives highlight how media industries co-opt individual ambition and vulnerability, transforming them into commodities, while often leaving creators feeling invisible, disposable, and empty. Here we can invoke Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer's concept of the cultural industry as a system that flattens individuality in the service of capitalist reproduction. Prestige, along with ratings, becomes another metric for engagement under media logic. Sidney Lumet's prestige is transactional, tied to who controls narratives and who gets remembered. Network also influences the studio in how the pursuit of status and position leads to absurd zero-sum power games. Catherine O'Hara's character, Patty, is abruptly fired after a tense power struggle with Griffin. Matt Remick's swift takeover of Patty's position is less a reward for merit and more a calculated move to control the studio's narrative and public image. This jockeying ultimately means nothing, since Matt will ask Patty to help him fix the Kool-Aid fallout. It becomes a revolving door of meaninglessness. However, Patty's simmering desire for revenge against Griffin reveals how personal grudges become deeply entwined with a sense of status in the cutthroat world of Hollywood executives. This dynamic closely parallels Network's arc, where Faye Dunaway's character, Diana Christensen, aggressively displaces the older news director, representing a ruthless hunger for control and visibility in the media industry. Although teetering close to cliché, both Patty and Diana embody the fierce, often ruthless ambitions that drive corporate power struggles. Also, in the studio, Matt's decision to shelve Martin Scorsese's deeply personal Jonestown project in favor of the commercially safe but critically hollow Kool-Aid underscores the sacrifice of artistic vision to market demands and spectacle. This echoes Network's critique of the culture industry, where authentic creativity is flattened into commodification. In both narratives, genuine artistic ambition is subordinated to media logic, which prioritizes engagement metrics and social buzz over meaningful cultural contribution. As stated by media theorist Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message, highlighting how the form and the systems of media production shape not just what is communicated, but what is valued, turning art into a product whose worth is measured by visibility and consumption rather than substance and originality. The studio synthesizes thematic and technical elements from satire's Network, Birdman, and The Player to craft a nuanced satire of prestige, ego, and recognition behind Hollywood's glamorous facade. Through Matt Remick and the supporting characters, the series reveals how visibility remains a critical form of power, especially for those working in the shadows of fame. The studio shows how the desire to be seen is not just a personal, but also profoundly structural and absurd aim. No one is immune. Even those at the top are expendable. Stylistically, by employing continuous long takes from both The Player and Birdman, overlapping dialogue, and theatrical ironic exchanges as a Network, the studio immerses viewers in a world where performance never ends and the hunger to be validated drives every decision. It becomes self-referential. It is not merely a comedy about Hollywood, but a reflection of how prestige and identity function in a culture where everyone is always performing and always waiting for applause.